This content is brought to you by iTrust Capital, which is a great platform that allows you to easily invest in crypto without worrying about taxes or fees. iTrust Capital allows you to invest in crypto through an individual retirement account or IRA. IRAs are tax sheltered accounts, which means all of your crypto is tax-free and can even grow tax-free over time. The process of signing up with iTrust Capital is very easy. They have a mobile app. They have 25 plus cryptocurrencies. They have full support, a dedicated team ready to help you. And it is free. And once again, 100% free to sign up with iTrust Capital. There are no hidden fees and there's no monthly subscription or membership. They also have great security. They utilize Coinbase custody for all their custodial services. So you don't have to worry. It is institutional grade crypto custody that they are using. This is a great platform. Once again, it is free to sign up. So visit the link in the description and go check it out. If you sign up with my link, you get a $100 funding bonus. So once again, check the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is David Schwartz, who's the Chief Technical Officer at Ripple. David, great to have you back on the show.
It's always a pleasure, Tony.
Well, David, I got to ask you about your trip to Antarctica. Not too many people get to visit that continent. Why did you pick that as a destination? And would you recommend it? And are you planning to go back?
I'm going to tell the real story. I've never told it before. It's hilarious. It's going to piss off the conspiracy theorists because there's no conspiracy here, but this is really, really hilarious. So one day, about 2 years before I went to Antarctica, I got an email from Chris Larson's executive assistant. And it was from an email thread about buying a block of tickets on a cruise ship, an icebreaker that was going to Antarctica. So, and it offered my wife and I if we wanted to go. And so I thought Chris Larson was buying a block of tickets and was like going to offer tickets to some of his friends. So we accepted, but there was no real detailed conversation about what was going on. Well, COVID hits and the trip itself is right in the middle of COVID and we almost didn't make it. The COVID controls were just absolutely, they were crazy. It was ridiculous. So we get there and we thought like Chris was going to be there. Like it was a thing about buying a block of tickets. But we later found out, first of all, nearly everyone bailed on the trip because of COVID. But also that was not what was happening at all. What was happening was a company that Chris had invested in was buying a block of tickets to their investors. And they were just offering Chris tickets. And I guess Chris didn't want to go either because of COVID or just, other things. And so he passed those tickets on to my wife and I, but we didn't know that until much later. So we're going on this trip. We have a great time, have no idea what's going on. And then Chris Larson happens to call me. And I said, hey, I said hello to him. And I mentioned that I was in Antarctica. And he had no recollection of the fact that he had given me the tickets, no recollection whatsoever. So now I have the challenge of how do you thank someone for a gift that's a very generous gift that they don't seem to remember giving you. So Chris, if you're listening, thank you. My wife and I had a great time. We got to see a solar eclipse. We got to see penguins. I didn't even know. Did you know that you could just take a cruise ship and go to Antarctica?
No, I think you have to get some special charter or something.
Right. That ship had recently gone to the North Pole. I mean, it's a pretty sophisticated icebreaker. So we had a great time. And I guess now I thanked Chris.
Wow. But that's cool. I mean, both you and your wife went, would you recommend it to other folks or is it kind of hardcore where you really have to prep for it and, the temperature?
The weather was fantastic. I mean, I have to say, I was stunned at how we bought so much cold weather gear.
Sure. And
we wore all of it the first day and they're like, oh, we don't need it. It was in 40 degrees with almost no wind, at least when we were there. And so very comfortable in, slightly your warm clothes, but you didn't need anything fancy. The biggest thing is sunglasses. The sun reflecting off the ice from all directions. You take your sunglasses off just for a few seconds, like try to take a picture with your phone or something, and you're unhappy. And sunblock, of course, for the same reason. You will burn parts of your body that you will burn the inside of your nostrils, you'll burn the bottom of your chin. But yeah, I reckon it's fantastic. I really think that it's one of those things that just seeing penguins, being able to walk among penguins, because so few people do go there. it was kind of annoying. They used to let you get right up to the penguins, but unfortunately, we don't know whether or not penguins can spread COVID, and we definitely don't. It would be
was that a real issue that they were concerned about? That?
Wow. Yeah, we didn't. Nobody had studied it. We didn't know. And we do know that some other animals can spread COVID, and so they had a lot more controls with interaction with the wildlife than they normally would have. But it was fantastic. And of course, getting to see a solar eclipse was special too. Although the depressing part, we get up the morning of the solar eclipse. It's about an hour before the eclipse. And I look outside and it's just overcast clouds everywhere. And I pull up a weather app, great internet access there somehow. I don't know how that's possible. But so I pull up a weather app and I see, oh, there's 3 breaks in the clouds, like less than a mile away. So we'll just move the ship to the breaks in the clouds, right? I zoom in a little closer and the break in the clouds is from 100% overcast to 99.4% overcast.
Oh, man.
So yes, I guess one could argue that it's technically a break in the clouds, but so it got really dark and then it got light again, which was kind of cool, but obviously it was not as spectacular as a solar eclipse with clear sky.
I don't know why, but when I think of Antarctica, I think of the movie The Thing, I guess maybe because it's one of my favorite movies and I have that imagery ingrained in my mind, but
yeah, it's a remote place, right? It's there's not a lot of people there, it was amazing to see like some of the old structures that had been built. Like we went to one place where some people had been stranded over the winter because their ship had sank, and it was just amazing just seeing like what was left of it, and like penguins had taken it over, which was kind of cool.
Wow.
Yeah, penguins are amazing. They're so funny to watch. They're so comical in the way they do things. All the cartoons that you see and all the, they really are those adorable, clumsy creatures.
Maybe I can convince my wife to do this trip. I don't know, but I may have to go by myself. We'll see. All right, let's jump into the big news I wanted to chat with you about. XLS-20 in the recent Ripple version 1.9 update. Can you tell us about that and the benefits and the vision for that as well?
Yeah, so XLS-20 is a standard for issuing NFTs on the XRP ledger. You need one on the XRP ledger more than you would on a ledger like Ethereum. On Ethereum, you could build your own NFT system using the smart contracts capability. The XRP ledger doesn't have that kind of smart contracts capability. Weitzu Wind came up with a little bit of a hack to allow you to issue NFTs on the XRP ledger mainnet, and that works. It's kind of like cramming a square peg in a round hole. Like it was a proof of concept and to show that it could be done, but having an infrastructure designed to do it so that there's a sort of an organized way to do it and everybody can sort of interoperate is a huge benefit. And XLS-20 is that standard. It's now been implemented in code. Well, we think that the XRP ledger is a good platform for delivering NFTs because of the low cost, the green design, and the fact that you can interoperate currently with this over 5,000 currencies as a distributed exchange. And so having an NFT system that sort of plugs into that infrastructure makes a lot of sense. RippleX proposed the standard last year based on feedback that we got from the XRPL community. And this provides, minting, trading, burning, all of the things that you need, and at that sort of low, tiny fraction of a penny transaction cost, which is obviously, like if you compare it to a platform like Ethereum, on the extreme other end, it's much, much cheaper. And because it doesn't require smart contracts to offer that functionality, it eliminates the risk of smart contract bugs or compatibility between different smart contracts. It provides a fixed feature set, and everybody knows what that feature set is. Which there's an advantage and a disadvantage. If that feature set matches what you need, that's fantastic. If that feature set doesn't match what you need, unlike Ethereum, you can't add your own functionality, but it has all of the core functionality for NFTs. And it has some more advanced things like retained royalty structures for creators, co-ownership, things like that. So it's not like it's a bare bones standard, but it doesn't provide all the bells and whistles that you could have in an Ethereum system. But of course, the more bells and whistles you add, the more complexity there is, and the harder it is to understand just what you've got. In other words, like if you have an NFT on Ethereum, as we've seen recently, a lot of people discovered that like they didn't have what they thought they had because the offering system, was different and there were various thefts. And so you don't have that risk of that type of complexity because you don't have that complexity, but you don't have the ability to use that complexity. So it's a good set of trade-offs, I think, for what most people want to do with NFTs. We think that once activated, there's going to be significant transaction volume from people using it. And right now we're vetoing, our validators are vetoing the enabling of the standard to give people time to conduct performance testing, make sure there's no security issues. Speaking for myself personally, I'm confident that there isn't like a large bug in it, and I'm confident that it's not going to like break the network itself. The thing that I'm still more concerned about, though, is just the growth of the ecosystem. Like to use an example, this is going back a couple of years, but Ethereum had pretty stable fees until a project called CryptoKitties became prominent, and all of a sudden the fees shot through the roof. That didn't really threaten the stability of the Ethereum ecosystem, but if you were relying on the low fees, that could have meant that you couldn't do what you wanted to do. And you could argue it's good for the ecosystem because more fees means more value to more people, but it kind of sucks for the person who was using Ethereum to solve some business case. And so we want to make sure that it's not just good for the well, first of all, we want to make sure it actually is good for the ecosystem. But even if it's good for the ecosystem, if it reduces the utility of the XRP ledger for payments, for example, as like if you were using Ethereum for payments when CryptoKitties hit, you'd probably be a little bummed that your transaction fees suddenly shot up, even though one could argue like the ecosystem was growing, it hurt you. And so there's an issue of just making sure that we don't disrupt what other people are using the XRP ledger for. And that's something that the community is going to have to think about. Any change in a public blockchain system is a pretty serious thing. I'm sure you remember when Bitcoin forked from Bitcoin Cash, you might have thought, oh, we're going to make blocks bigger. That's simple. Or we're going to add segregated witness. That's simple. The reality is it's never simple.
Right.
So we want to make sure that the community is comfortable, and then validators are also going to, not only are we going to have to be persuaded, but we're going to have to persuade other validators, or they're going to have to come to persuade each other, or maybe that won't happen. Maybe people will find issues with the standard, and then something else will come by. So we're going through that process. I think it's pretty likely that XLS20 will get activated on the mainnet, at least substantially the way it is now, maybe with no changes. But I'm not the dictator of the XRP ecosystem, so it's going to come down to those other validators and how the community feels about it.
Is there like a tentative date that you guys are putting out there? Like, let's target this respective date to get everybody to decide what they want to do.
We had target dates for things like finalizing the spec, finalizing the code, getting it out in a release, because those are things that are pretty much within our control. We generally try not to create targets for things that are outside of our control, because then, if you hit them or don't hit them, it's basically just, so I don't think we really have a target for internal activation. I think you could sort of say order of magnitude, if there are no speed bumps, it could probably take a couple of months for people to become comfortable. But you never know. There could be a major push against it because there might be issues that people have with it. It's very, very, very hard to say. I don't anticipate a particularly rocky road. I think the biggest complaint that we're likely to see from the community is just the increased transaction volume. So when you increase transaction volume in any public blockchain, that increases everybody's costs, right? Like if you run a Bitcoin node and the block size goes up, that means you use more network bandwidth, you use more CPU, you use more storage, and that increases your costs to run that node. And so if you perceive no value in a change that increases your costs, then it makes sense that you would advocate against that change. But I think there'll be people who will advocate for the change because they do get value from the change. So that's kind of, that's kind of what's going to play out.
So would the order or the roadmap, I should say, be this update, the decision is made by the validators, let's say everything moves according to plan, there are no major issues, and then it would allow almost any user to be able to start minting NFTs on the XRP ledger. I know you mentioned that there's a kind of a hacked solution, so to speak, happening right now, but when can, and I apologize if you address it, but let's say I want to mint an NFT on the XRP ledger, when and how could I do that?
Well, so you could mint it right now if you wanted to, like using Weetsuwin's hack.
Okay.
But the disadvantage of that is that we expect XLS20 will sort of replace that standard. So you'd be minting in an ecosystem that's probably likely to go away. XLS20, you can experiment with it today on the DevNet. So there's a development network on which the standard is enabled. It's a beta environment. It launched around January. and NFT functionality was recently enabled. So what that lets you do is that allows you to experiment with minting, trading, burning, but explicitly on DevNet, data should not be considered permanent. So, you know, I wouldn't recommend using it for a live project. I think realistically, it's going to be a couple of months, assuming that there's no hiccups or no issues. Just everything moves slowly, and even if we had like broad consensus today, and everybody's like, yeah, we want this thing enabled as quickly as possible, you still need time for participants in the ecosystem to make sure that it doesn't break something they're currently doing. Sure. Right. So you still can't make an immediate change. There's a technical tutorial at xrpl.org that walks you through the process on DevNet of creating and trading NFTs. So you can walk through the process, and then I generally probably would recommend that you experiment on DevNet, get everything working, and that way when the standard does go live, you're kind of good to go.
Sure. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I'm assuming, and if I remember correctly, you guys have been in talks with different NFT marketplaces, I think Mintable or Rarible. I can't remember the exact names, but would the plan be, once this respective standard is rolled out, to have the XRP ledger as an option on some of these NFT marketplaces where you can create and start selling and so forth?
I think that's probably what those exchanges would do. Yes, I think that's kind of the way this fits into their strategy. They may it depends on the level of commitment that they decide that they're interested in this ecosystem. But yeah, the immediate answer is yes. They'd probably add that as an option. And then you will probably see projects, XRPCraft, which is trying to appeal to Minecraft's active users and a sort of game content creator ecosystem. There's Xpunks, which is so it's another project that's probably, so you're going to see these kinds of projects. Ledger City DevNull Productions is working on something to launch that involves things placed on buildings, which is kind of a cool market. So you're going to see those like XRPL specific projects, but I think you're right that the way that existing exchanges would probably integrate this would be as another option.
Cool. So I guess we just got to wait for that rollout, and then we'll have more options on that front. But sounds like the ball is rolling, things are in motion, and maybe in a few months or so we get that update fully rolled out.
Yeah, I think so. I think our creator fund is helping to provide creators with financial and technical support. So we're going to try to drive that as quickly as we possibly can. Anything we can do. We've heard some feedback from the developer community who's experimenting with the NFT functionality on DevNet and so we're making sure that the process goes as smoothly as we can.
So let's say, once again, in the roadmap that this is rolled out, the marketplaces and so forth start integrating. Obviously, there is a competition happening in the market. Ethereum was the first mover, but we see folks like Solana and some others are trying to make a big push for NFTs on their respective blockchain. What are your guys' plans on to help boost adoption and maybe it's not boost, but educate folks that, hey, there is a better option here. You don't have to pay the ridiculous gas fees on Ethereum and so forth. Is there like a strategy on promoting this?
Yeah, and I think the strategy is very similar to the way you promote like digital media services. Like if you have a digital media service, you promote it in two ways. So number one is you promote content, right? Like Netflix has a whole bunch of content that's only on Netflix, and that makes Netflix interesting. And then there's also just the technological ability of how well it works. Netflix is nice. It's easy to log into. It works on all your devices. You get a good experience. So there's that combination of two factors. And so the first one is the one that you mentioned, which is like, it's cheaper, it's faster, it just works. Like it's a really good way to get something done. And then I think the other thing that's I think at least equally important is to have interesting content, because it doesn't matter how good it is technically if the content that you want is not there. We've been looking into things that go beyond just collectibles, things like carbon credits. There's a company called Invert. Things like credit verification, tokenization, exchange functionality, real estate, components of games. I think digital experiences are interesting, like media and entertainment type NFTs that not just JPEGs, not just profile photos. I think also, I think you can look at the whole collectible market, which is huge, but I think like the broader picture is digital rights. Like you should think of the target market of the NFT technology as digital rights, which is a massive marketplace. Think about movies that you've purchased, video games that you've purchased, songs, books on Kindle. I mean, there's dozens of sci-fi stories that sort of forecast this massive increase in the market for ownership of virtual goods. And they're not all dystopian. Mm. Most of them are dystopian, aren't they? But they're not all dystopian. And we can avoid maybe the dystopian scenario where we own nothing. I'm sure you've heard the meme, you'll own nothing and be happy. Hopefully we can avoid that dystopian result. But yeah, virtual people want virtual goods. They do. It's a huge market.
For sure. And you mentioned some of the other use cases outside of just artwork. So are any of your existing partners, and I don't know if you can talk about any specifics, but who are currently leveraging the XRP ledger and different ways, are they looking to leverage this technology maybe for certifications and verifications of certain documents? I know you guys work with banks and payment providers and so forth. So outside of the artwork stuff, can those clients use the technology for certificates, issuance, deeds, I don't know, whatever it may be?
Real estate. Yeah, we definitely have a couple of companies that are interested in looking at real estate. Not that I can mention, but GameFi is really looking into sort of adding value to the gaming experience. We have partners that are looking at digital experiences. Carbon offsets, I think, are a big one. It's a very tricky. I know all the arguments why it's a bad idea, and we've gone through all of them. Getting that right is going to be very challenging, but I think we might be able to do that, and I think that's a big one.
Are there any specific existing NFT projects on the XRP ledger that stand out to you? And I know it's, like you said, it's via the hacked version of what was put together, but any projects that stand out to you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've spoken to literally thousands of creators, and we actually just recently announced the projects that are getting funding for what they're doing now. And Justin Bua, who's an entrepreneur who's working on an art-focused metaverse. There's XPunks, which I mentioned before, with like an IOU NFT. And apparently Steven Sebring, who's an award-winning artist, filmmaker, and photoscientist, is working on a collection of historical objects. So that's kind of where we are now. I think you're going to see that big explosion, the big explosion with XLS20. But I mean, it's just the set of creators that have come to us, literally thousands of fantastic ideas of people who want a place to build these things.
Yeah, there was one item that popped up recently. I saw it in the news, and then a bunch of people were tweeting at me saying, "Hey, ask David about this." And it was Michael Jordan collection, NFT collection on the XRP ledger, which I don't know if you know anything about it, but it's interesting and just shows the bridge happening between the old collectible world to the new.
Yeah. No, I don't know anything about that specific project, but I mean, there are a number of people and companies sitting out there with collections of things that could be NFTs. And I know everybody sees these stories about how, somebody creates a series of NFTs of some kind and suddenly becomes a millionaire overnight. It's going to be interesting to see, what that inspires people to do. My brother actually does collectibles, and he keeps getting he's in the collectible business, and he keeps getting people who have large collections of things like baseball cards and sports memorabilia from particular players that they were very interested in. If you're a Michael Jordan fan, you probably collect a lot of Michael Jordan stuff, and a lot of them have thought about, like, could this be a series of NFTs? Could I trade the NFT along with the item? What's the way to make that work? Another interesting idea that I heard from one company is this idea that you could store your collectibles physically somewhere and then have an NFT that represents the ownership of the collectible, so that then, like, you could trade the NFT, but then the NFT gave you the right to go to the warehouse and actually claim or see it or claim it. And so that would give you a way you could then feed into DeFi and borrow against it, or have fractional ownership, or whatever you wanted to do with it. Like, these kinds of creative ideas of things to do with NFTs are just, are out there. So it's going to be interesting to see what the space makes possible.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. Let's talk about ODL. Any updates that you can share on the on-demand liquidity front? Any new corridors that we can expect this year and things along those lines?
2021 was just an incredible year for us. Global momentum, skyrocketed. Customer demand coming back after the end, as the sort of effects of COVID on the economy seem to be sort of easing off a bit. We're not going to see what the situation in Ukraine's done, so that didn't really, that didn't affect the growth in 2021. The transaction count more than doubled, which transaction count is big. So there's two big questions of like, is the right metric transaction count or is the right metric dollar volume? It's both. And the payment volume was over 10 billion. So the dollar volume is, converting into dollars. But I think the transaction count is kind of more important because that sort of controls how sticky and how the system is. So if you imagine people are aggregating payments because payments suck, right? Why do you get paid? Why do you probably get paid every 2 weeks, right? Why do you pay your mortgage every month? Because payments suck. So the higher payment volume, I think, is a good indication of how people you're really driving utility and how you're really changing the way people are paying each other. And the transaction volume more than doubled in 2021, in particular in the APAC region, which is one of the largest contributors of ODL volume. These are areas that are experiencing rapid growth, and so more than doubling. As far as new ODL corridors, we're always working on them. We currently have 20 payout markets, or a little more than 20. Middle East got added on last year, so we're trying. That is actually the hardest part. So one of the things that you forget about is that you have to get the money to the recipient, right? That the actual hardest part, the blockchain stuff works, XRP works, Bitcoin works, Ethereum works. Those are not the hard parts of making this work. The hard part is delivering the money to the recipient. And so those corridors are critical. And I think you're going to see some announcements and big movements on this front in those global markets that are right at the focus of growth.
Quick question for you that just came to mind. I know from my knowledge historically that you would have exchange liquidity providers or partners where the XRP is bought on the open market via one exchange, sent to the receiving country's exchange and converted there. Is that still the same setup? And I apologize if I'm confusing things. Or are you guys also introducing the Liquidity Hub to power ODL? Or is it both?
That's exactly what we're doing. So a Liquidity Hub is aimed at a cluster of problems. So one of them is exchange immaturity. Some exchanges are very mature and reliable, but some are not. And if the exchange isn't working, and if the model is, go to just exchange to exchange, then that produces downtime. And so to add fault tolerance around exchanges, to add cushions where you might have some money sitting somewhere that you could use as a cushion if the exchange wasn't working, to prevent a customer from having to onboard with a dozen exchanges. Imagine Ripple signs up a new customer, okay, you need to onboard with these 7 exchanges. And they're like, okay, well, I got to be able to deliver money to them, or I have to be able to get money from them. To alleviate some of that sort of friction and make the whole system smoother, we came up with this concept of Liquidity Hub, which is this idea that, and it's sort of its simplest approach, you essentially would onboard with Ripple, and Ripple would sort of aggregate the behavior of those exchanges. And that abstracts away both the need to become their customer and the need to operate with them, and it simplifies the experience for those users. One of the things that we learned from RippleNet is when we first started selling payment capability to financial institutions, it was very sort of peer-to-peer. It was there were these 2 companies that wanted to make payments between each other. Okay, and so they would both become RippleNet customers. That kind of works. And that was kind of in the early days of the internet, you would go get an internet connection because there was something on the internet that you wanted. But nobody does that today, right? You don't get an internet connection for Twitter. You don't get an internet connection for email, or maybe, but email with all kinds of people, right? The way it works now is the reason you get the internet is because you can do everything with it. Right. And so we sort of had this transition of RippleNet from a set of people who had a peer to a real network where you could go to RippleNet and you could sign a master contract, and then you could partner. Yes, you would still need to sign a sort of business agreement, but the fact that you were both part of RippleNet and you would both sign this master agreement gave you this framework that expedited the process. And so it started to feel like a real network where you could come to the network, and RippleNet, instead of saying, I'm going to RippleNet because I need to make payments to Australia, say, I'm going to RippleNet because you have these 6 things that I'm very interested in. Oh, what else do you have? And then when we go to a new customer, let's say you're a new bank, and I say to you, hey, would you like to join RippleNet? And you say, hey, I can settle shekels to Israel. We'll say, great, we'll go take that to all of our customers and see how many of them need to settle shekels, right? Like we become your marketing department. So it was that transition. Liquidity Hub is sort of that transition again, where you can think, instead of ODL being like a bundle of, oh, I do want to make payments to Mexico, so I'm going to onboard with Bitso, and then I'll have this one capability. That's good, but that's not as great as, oh, I become a Ripple customer and now I can make payments to all of these places. And so I would think you should think of Liquidity Hub as that sort of networkizing of ODL, of more like on board with Ripple, and now you get this whole suite of services that doesn't involve you integrating with 20 other things.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You eliminate a lot of friction, and you're just opening up a ton more opportunities for your clients and partners. So there has been a lot of chatter around Jack Mallers' Strike Bitcoin Lightning Network app. And all of a sudden, some folks are posing the question, oh my God, is this the XRP killer, or will it make XRP obsolete and ODL? And I would love for you, and I know your colleague Ashish Burla tweeted about this, I'd love for you to maybe add some clarity there as to the comparison between the two. And for those who may not understand and are seeing these tweets and these statements being made.
Again, what I would point out is two things. So one is that the hard part is the last mile. That's the, like, cryptocurrencies work. I don't dispute that cryptocurrencies work if you want to use any cryptocurrency like as a way of making payments. But the interesting thing is, if you notice, people are not really using cryptocurrencies to make payments, right? Like, why don't people use Tron or Bitcoin or XRP or anything? Why are these things not taking over the world? And the answer is that the details matter. Integrate, like I was mentioning just before about Liquidity Hub, like being able to onboard with one company and then having everything just work rather than having to acquire all the things piecemeal. The last mile, how do you get the money to the recipient? Those are the real challenges. I think the type of thinking that's reflected in what Jack Mallers said is the kind of thinking that we had in the early days. Oh, we'll just sell software to banks and they'll use XRP for their payments and it'll all just work. And I think the past 10 years prove that it's not quite that simple. You have to, there are a lot of sort of sub challenges that you have to get right. You need enterprise level software. You need to solve the last mile. You need to package up the integration so that every customer doesn't have to figure out how to interoperate with every other customer. I think what he's saying is that they've solved the easy part, but everybody has solved the easy part already. We had the easy part solved, 7+ years ago. The hard part is managing the volatility of crypto assets. Like that's a hard part. Yeah. The analogy that I think Ashish might have used this is like saying, oh, GM can compete with Tesla because they can just buy batteries. Like, not really, right? Tesla had to figure out how to do everything right. And they're still struggling at the margins and the details of like producing a quality product that their customers will love. And so it is not that simple. I think what they realized is that the easy part is easy. And we realized that a long time ago. Regulatory is another big one. Like, it takes years to get regulators comfortable. We've designed the way ODL is done, where the customers are not exposed to the crypto, and getting regulators comfortable and going to central banks. It's just, again, I would say he's discovered that the easy part is easy.
And then also from my perspective, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, you guys are dealing with enterprises and businesses, and you've laid out a lot of pipeline globally. Lightning is not even on that level yet. And also, it's what Jack and the folks there at Strike have put together is more peer-to-peer B2C, if you want to put it that way, or C2C.
Yeah.
If I were to compare the two.
When the first blockchain that had low costs and high speeds launched, might have been like, in the early days, everyone's like, well, people will use this for all payments. Like, payments are solved now. Everybody will just use, but this is like coming up with a new religion and saying that you've solved the problem of conflicts between religion. Sure, if everybody believed in your religion, there would be no more, people would find something else to fight over, I'm sure. But like, it's naive to think that because you've come up with this one solution, everybody will just use it. And like, the hard part is how do you get there? And yeah.
So one item I want to follow up the Jack Mallers question on was getting some details on the work you did on Bitcoin in the early days. And there's a reason I want to do it, because I know some of the skeptics will say, well, what does David know about Bitcoin? And I want to make sure that history is is given in context with the question I asked before.
Yeah, I found Bitcoin in mid 2011. I was following what was going on, the development, and I just fell in love. I just thought this was the coolest, most interesting thing ever. And at the time, mining was just starting to reach the point where it was there was some sort of pooling of mining, where it just reached the point where your odds of mining a block solo were low enough that it made sense to create sort of these mining pools to aggregate. And they were running into a lot of problems because the Bitcoin software just wasn't designed with that use case in mind. It just didn't scale to the number of requests that miners were sending for work. And so I saw someone offered like a 20 Bitcoin reward if someone could solve particular problems with the software. And then someone added 10 Bitcoins and someone added 15, and it reached something like 120 Bitcoin. Bitcoin was like $8 at the time. Like, well, okay, that's real money. And so I figured I needed something to do to understand the code. If I just were looking at the code just randomly, that wouldn't be as efficient as having a real problem in mind. And so I decided to fix some of the early issues, and you can see my commits, in the history. And I got those Bitcoin rewards, and they later made the down payment on my first house in Oakland, which was kind of cool. So, I mean, I've worked on optimizing the performance of the Bitcoin software. And then obviously, soon after that, I did, Arthur Brito and I probably wrote most of the XRP ledger software in late 2011, early 2012.
That's amazing, man. You may have maybe a book that you can write about stories back in the day in conjunction with building the XRP ledger.
Yeah, that was just the craziest year of my life. Just so productive. A lot of people don't know, Arthur and I would commit code before we synced up several times a day, and we would each commit our code right before the sync up so that I could see what he was working on, he could see what I was working on. And you can actually see that that's all public now. When normally what people will do when they make a project like that public is they'll sort of wipe the history out to go back to like a clean starting point, because it's kind of confusing and there's all these false starts and everything. Well, we left all that in there. And so anyone who wants to can go and see, like, you want to know, like, when did we settle on 100 billion units of XRP? You can go and look and then see where that commit was done. And it was all the code that we were using as we were doing it. So you can go back in time and see the sort of the evolution of the code in the project, and you can follow it at that level. You can see how much work I did each day and what times of day I was working and everything because of those frequent commits. And I think I'm kind of glad we did that. Obviously, there's some embarrassing mistakes still in there and some comments that, maybe should have been, but we just one day we were ready to make the source code public. And so we flipped the switch to make the source code public, and we never stopped to think like, should we remove some of this stuff? So it's all out there if anyone wants to see how we did it.
Oh, wow. That's very cool, man. Think about it, David. Maybe there's a book here. There's a story to be told, excuse me. I wanted to ask you about private ledgers and CBDCs. I know you guys have been doing some pilots with folks like Bhutan and so forth. Any updates on that front, and any, maybe hints towards announcements we could hear this year?
Nothing to share just yet. We're still actively engaging with over a dozen central banks, and we hope to share an update on the partnership with Palau, which is, I think, the other interesting one that we've talked about publicly. With Bhutan, I can't really share details yet. Pilot's going well. I think we'll probably be sharing details on phase 2 of that within a couple of weeks.
There were some questions from the folks in the community asking, for example, on the private ledgers, would NFTs be able to be issued within those private ledgers if needed?
So that's a decision that the operator of those ledgers are going to have to make. So this is kind of our strategy. We think probably at first, realistically, they're just going to want their own fiat on there. So like if it was the United States, they're just going to want dollars. But I think then what we try to do is we try to sort of do the upsell thing and say, look, US banks also want to hold euros. Why would you not let them hold euros so that they can make euro payments without having to have a separate account on a separate ledger? It's just a convenience for them, right? It's you push a button and they get this tremendous convenient function. But now that sort of enables US banks to make euro payments to each other without going through an intermediary, which is kind of cool. And then the next thing is like, well, they want to hold people, they want to hold XRP. The idea is this, like, if you make a walled garden, what happens is somebody who's both inside and outside the garden makes a business of acting as a sort of hole in the wall. why would you not just push the button to eliminate the wall? Why would you create this business where what's going to happen is everybody who's on both sides of the wall competes with everybody else, and so the profit margin goes down to very little, and the wall serves no purpose but to make inconveniences for people. And so we're hoping that we can convince them as they get more comfortable to provide more capability in the private ledgers. Nothing prevents them from having, it's just flipping a switch, from having NFT capability in the private ledgers, DEX capability in the private ledgers, order books, payment, more sophisticated payment options. They can have all of that technology is free. It's just going to be a matter of convincing them to push the button. And I don't think that's going to be that hard. I think the obstacles are going to be more regulatory than anything else. And so it's going to be a matter of just convincing them to have that comfort level. I think that's kind of like the sort of trick that you do. It's kind of like the Trojan horse strategy, where like you give them a system that does only what they want, and then you convince them incrementally. It's kind of like the way Tesla is working towards full self-driving, right? Tesla wanted to introduce full self-driving. The government's like, no, you can't do that. And Tesla's like, okay, but what if we helped people drive by telling them when the red light turned green? And now you're helping people drive, but you're also building confidence that, yeah, you know what? You can tell correctly when it's safe to go. You say, okay, we'll help the person make a lane change, but they have to approve the lane change in their mind. You're like, okay, the car does know when it should make a lane change, and it can make that, right? You build their confidence in a safe way, and Tesla got whole bunches of features out in their cars faster than anyone else did, because they sort of played this game with regulators where their cars pretty much self-drive now. But they still haven't gotten regulatory approval for full self-driving, right? So it's kind of that strategy of like, show you that we can do the thing so that you have no reason not to let us do it, and then kind of incrementally. But start out just, it does the thing that you want it to do, but it will show you that it can do more, and you build that confidence.
There was another question that came up, and I don't know if this makes sense, but the question is, will the value of XRP be the same in the private ledgers as it is on the public?
Yes. The value proposition of XRP is that it has these liquidity pools. If it doesn't make sense to isolate something, like there's no place where gold is worth twice as much as it is now, because if there was, people would just bring gold there, and they would buy gold somewhere else, and they would sell it there. Unless the only way that you can have the value be very different in two places is if there's a lot of friction. And if there's friction, someone will make a business of removing that friction. So I don't see any realistic scenario where XRP has significantly different value unless something's wrong. So like a good example of a case, there was a time where the value of XRP, they called it the kimchi premium, right? Where the value of XRP in some Asian countries was very high, but that was because there were capital controls, right? That was because things were bad. I think that's a sign that something is not going well. The value proposition of XRP is that you can take it to all of the places, right? If I sell you some gold and you say, hey, this gold can only be used in jewelry, you're like, well, that kind of sucks. I don't want that gold, right? The value proposition of gold is that you have access to the entire value proposition of gold. And so I don't see any scenario in which where it makes sense to snip pieces off, again, unless something is wrong.
Sure. Let's jump to crypto regulations and the entire market at large. I would love to get your thoughts on President Biden's crypto executive order that was signed last month. Do you see this as a positive sign and a move in the right direction?
I definitely do see it as a positive sign and a move in the right direction. The worst case scenario is that crypto is ignored and made to live under a series of regulations from the 30s. Like that's probably the worst case scenario ever, where there's this constant uncertainty, where the only thing that happens is there are enforcement actions when people get, when regulators decide to clamp down on something, or when someone gets, something bad happens, like someone rips off investors and there's a lawsuit, and then regulators get, like, that's the worst case scenario. The reality is this is a case where the government has to act. It has to act. It's not going to get better by the government not doing anything, because there's fear, and there's going to be, and there will be cases where there's scams. I mean, there's cases where customers are going to get hurt. And so regulators are not, there's no scenario where regulators just leave the thing alone, right? That's just not going to happen because of the scams and everything. So attention at the highest levels is a good thing. And I think if you look at the executive order, you see an acknowledgement from the highest levels in the White House that the United States wants to be a responsible tech leader, and that it's important to get crypto right. And I think that's good. I think there's push for a clear regulatory framework, which there's going to have to be. I know the libertarians are like, I wish the government would just leave it alone. The problem is that the government leaves it alone, you see what's going to happen. Yeah. Bad things are going to happen. There are outright frauds. And then that's what's going to be, the whole industry is going to be painted as the perpetrator of those frauds. I saw something recently that was kind of sad, where there was a push to get the Wikipedia Foundation to stop accepting crypto. And if you look at the argument for why it should stop accepting it, they're talking about all these bad things that are going on in the crypto space. Well, there's bad things going on in every space. Bad things happen with dollars. It kind of breaks my heart that, but if there is not some sort of activity, that's what's going to happen. The crypto economy is massive and growing. This is an acknowledgement from the highest levels in the White House of that there's an opportunity for financial services for all Americans. I think there's an acknowledgement of that. And so I think that's a good, I think overall it's very good. Not perfect, first step, you know.
Yeah, I think some folks were thinking, yeah, politics, gets involved in all these conversations sometimes, but that it was going to be bad. But I think some folks were pleasantly surprised that, hey, this is something good and a call to action for all these regulators to come together. So certainly something good that finally came out from the government on crypto, and we're moving in the right direction. So I wanted to ask you, and I know you guys can't talk much about this, but I have to ask because folks want me to ask you about this. Any thoughts on how the lawsuit situation's going, in addition to, look, there's like a lot coming to light with the SEC and potential conflicts of interest. I know members of Congress, I spoke to some of them that are putting pressure on Chair Gensler, and the SEC on how they're handling reporting for crypto and companies and so forth. Any thoughts that you can share on this whole thing?
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of discussion going on about what's being revealed in the documents and things that were going on in the SEC. But there is only one real legal question in the case, which is XRP an investment contract under securities law? Like, that's the legal question in the case. And then, of course, there's all of these other things going on. XRP works like a currency. Major branches of the US government have called it a currency. There's not a single country on the planet that's classified XRP as a security. The SEC and the government could have developed clear laws, clear rules and regulations. The SEC is trying to regulate by enforcement. They're trying to make the law in the courts rather than the legislature, rather than having people weigh in on what they think the laws should be. I think there's an acknowledgement from just about everybody in the industry, except maybe the SEC right now, that there needs to be clear rules of the road. There needs to be some set of guidelines to foster innovation, and it's not going to happen, case by case. When the SEC filed the lawsuit, there was a destruction of $15 billion in market value, and they've harmed countless holders of XRP who have no connection to Ripple at all. And the worst part about it is it means that there's so many things that I would like to talk about that my lawyers tell me that I can't talk about. And honestly, that bothers me the most. The biggest thing that bothers me is there's decisions that Ripple made that people have criticized, and those criticisms, they're legitimate criticisms, and I'm like, oh, but what you don't realize is this thing, and I can't say it, and it's just frustrating. I feel like my hands are a little tied. I feel like this is something that I've personally worked on for a decade, and many other people find people who have worked on it both inside Ripple and outside Ripple, and I feel like we're kind of handicapped in defending ourselves by the fact that we're fighting this litigation. And it's just, when it was first filed, it just every day felt like a little bit depressing. And then I guess, after a while, you just kind of life goes on. But the other thing is it's just chilling. It's just forcing innovation out of the United States, which is just, I see people on a fairly frequent basis, people tell me, well, I'm definitely not going to do this in the United States not because it's illegal, but because I can't tell if it's illegal or not.
Right.
Which, there are very few other countries that do that. There are very few other countries where you have this legitimate fear that the government will tell you that you should definitely have known that what you were doing was illegal for the many years in which you were doing it. Like this sort of surprise. I don't know. Yeah, I probably shouldn't say anything else.
It's frustrating. And I've spoken to even the folks at the library. I know they've been dealing with a lot of things. And look, I think something's going on at the SEC where, as an institution which is supposed to have some integrity, they've lost a lot of grounds on that front. And even when the CEO of Coinbase comes out and says you're acting shady, I mean, it's just strange times and how the SEC is operating.
But unfortunately, like as a citizen, there's nothing that the fact that your government is doing something that you think is bad or shady, even if you have the biggest proof in the world of it, that doesn't get you out of having to comply with, the law as best you can determine it, which is like the situation that all of these things are coming to light, but I would just caution people, like, don't think that you can sort of ignore the law just because you found out that you didn't like the way it was being made and enforced. I mean, unfortunately, the reality is that we have the government we have.
For sure. I know we're running up on time here. I wanted to ask you about PolySign. Any updates, anything we can expect to hear soon?
Well, there was a big announcement, I think just yesterday, just the day before we record, just the day before, the MG Stover acquisition. So MG Stover is a digital asset administrator that serves hedge funds, private equity firms, venture capital firms. They have over $40 billion in digital assets that they help these entities manage. PolySign also announced a Series C financing round, and this is going to get the conspiracy folks going, but Soros Fund Management is in the C round. So you're going to see all of those. Hopefully we won't see any anti-Semitic takes, but you will definitely see the conspirators out in force. Cowen also, who invested in our B round, increased their stake, showing their increasing confidence in the direction the company's going. Yeah, I'm on the board of directors there. I'm an investor advisor. And it has just been a great experience working with people like Jack McDonald and Arthur Brito. Although, the kind of sad thing for me personally is I really like working with ideas in that very early stage where you have a mostly blank sheet of paper and it's like, how are we going to do this thing? How are we going to solve this problem? And then the more when you're in a company, you're sort of constrained. It's a good thing, but you're constrained by the strength of the company. Like, oh, we have a lot of money. Okay, well, that means there's certain things we're not going to do. Oh, we have a lot of smart people. Okay, that means there's certain things we're not going to do. When we have customers who are financial institutions, okay, that means there's certain, like, those things are good, but there are also sort of limits on what you can do. You can only solve the problems that play to your strengths. And at PolySign, like when PolySign first started, it was again a blank sheet of paper, and it was just a great experience that we could do things however we wanted. But now we have all these things. They're fantastic. The Cowen investment, the merger with Stover, the stuff that we've built already is fantastic, but it also it draws a path for us. There's a clear best path that's constrained by all the advantages we have. So it's funny, but like the better something is doing, the less it really inspires and moves me. It's an ironic, because there's more constraints on what I can do. Like I have to do things that make sense with the Stover acquisition. Stover acquisition is fantastic. Obviously, I'm very glad it happened, but that means there's all kinds of other things that we could do that we can't do now because they don't make sense in that context. So it's kind of funny. Like I'm happiest in the situation where we're the sort of the scrappiest, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. So there's always the question that comes up, is Ripple and PolySign working in any capacity, or maybe there's plans for the future, or are they, completely separate?
Ripple has an investment in PolySign, and Ripple occasionally faces challenges involving custody of digital assets, like for Ripple's customers involved in things like Liquidity Hub. So there's definitely potential for cooperation there. I don't think I can say much else.
Noted. Folks wanted to get your take on Songbird and Flare Networks progress, if you had any thoughts to share on that.
I haven't followed all that closely, but I like what they've built so far. I have Songbird that was issued through the drop to people who held XRP, and I like the ecosystem. Seems like kind of fun and whimsical to me. I'm excited to see when they were able to build a live network that, not that Songbird's not live, but it's explicitly experimental. So I'm following it with interest. I haven't had that many conversations with the people behind the network, and you've probably seen at times I've been critical of their decisions when I think I'm trying. It's funny. I will criticize something even if I like it. So don't assume that me saying something bad about something means I don't like. Like if I really hated something, I probably wouldn't bother making a minor criticism, right? Like there's no point. So I love what they're doing. I think they're a great team.
Final question here before we hit the wrap-up question, and that is, what are your thoughts on Elon Musk, free speech, trying to buy Twitter, and all that?
First of all, Elon Musk has nothing to do with free speech. Free speech is about treating all political and social speech equally. That's what free speech is. It's about not, Elon Musk is looking for favorable treatment for political speech that he favors. That's the truth. What Elon Musk is saying is he doesn't like Twitter's editorial policy. He wants it to be more favorable towards certain political speech that he favors. Well, I don't like Fox News's editorial policy, but I don't watch it. I understand that there's people who like Fox News just the way it is. And they have, I can criticize Fox News. I can say their editorial policy sucks. I could even pressure them to change that. I could say, hey, you should be more, I would be more likely to watch your but they're like, you're not our target market. The reality is people want to be challenged in their ideas, but only a little bit, only a little bit. I'm willing to hear, for example, on racism, I'm interested to hear people's takes on things like affirmative action. But I don't want to hear blacks were better off under slavery. I have no interest in engaging with someone who has that idea. That's outside of and if Twitter made me engage with that idea a lot, I would like Twitter less. And if I were a marginal Twitter user, I wouldn't use it. So the reality is Twitter has to provide its users what they want, and they don't want to hear, a significant fraction of Twitter's users just don't want to engage with the speech that Elon Musk wants Twitter to include in its editorial policy. And what that would do is that would change the base of Twitter users and probably decrease the size of their user base. Now, why does Elon Musk care about Twitter's editorial policy? Because Twitter is popular. What Elon Musk wants is something that can't exist. He wants the platform that's popular, because if it's unpopular, it does him no good, right? Nobody wants to shout on a platform that's not popular. So he wants a platform that's popular, but he also wants it to take his speech and force people to engage with it who don't want to engage with it. Just like I don't want to engage with Hitler did nothing wrong. I don't want to engage with blacks were better off under slavery. Most of the people on Twitter don't want to engage with the speech that Elon Musk wants on Twitter. And if it forced them to engage with it, it wouldn't be popular. So he wants a contradiction that cannot possibly exist, that has nothing to do with free speech. So I am as anti-Elon Musk on this issue as probably as possible to be.
It just seems like there's other workings happening here, though, with so Mark Cuban's tweet about Elon and stock price and the value of his investment. Sometimes I can't wrap my head around it. It's just, I don't know what Elon's doing, but
when you have that much money, I mean, you just, is this a lark? Is this a brilliant strategy of some kind? Is this him trying to make some kind of point? Is he just bored? I don't know.
All right, David, I know I kept you over time. Final
That's
question
fine.
here. If you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be about?
I think the biggest thing for me is to try to untangle the sort of bad faith interactions that are happening in the world, some way to get people to engage with each other. The problem is I'm not so naive that I believe that, like, if the Jews could just have had a chat with Hitler, like he would have, oh my God, I'm so wrong, right? Like good faith interactions, I still believe in their power, even though I'm not naive enough to think that like that bad ideas don't always come from bad people who are deliberately trying to do bad things and don't just not realize that what they're doing is bad. But I think something to force people to have more interactions with people whose views are different from them. I still believe, despite, I know everyone tells me I'm a wealthy white middle-aged man. Of course, I believe that like you can just talk racists out of being racist, or you can talk. Yeah, of course I believe, right, that. But I do on some level, no matter how much I know that that it probably would never work. I mean, if it's my metaverse, it's going to sort of untangle those bad faith interactions and get people to question the sort of bubbles they've painted themselves into somehow.
Well, I think a big part of that is to have more transparency and accountability, where I think if people's actual faces and names were shown on their profiles, it wouldn't be as bold, of course, right? The keyboard warriors. And if it's in the metaverse where it's tied to a blockchain and a profile, and yes, they have to opt in. I'm not trying to be Klaus Schwab here, but they have to opt in. But you're George from Chicago, Illinois or something, and I can see who you are. You have your opinions, and we're in the metaverse having a debate versus random guy 5 on Twitter who I don't know.
The only problem with that, though, is that if random guy 5 is like a bigot and all of his friends are bigots, he doesn't mind. If he lives in a community where that's like, he doesn't mind. Meanwhile, they can all pile on, David Schwartz, from San Francisco, and then they show up at my workplace, so I wish there were simple solutions. And again, but unfortunately, I don't. This is kind of very fundamental to my thinking about things. I still have this intuitive feel that there should be simple solutions to these problems, but every time I can always find the thing that's wrong with the solution, and it's like I feel like I want to make the world a better place, but especially recently, how everything has become politicized, and how people can't even agree on basic core. Like we have a disease, right, COVID, that's spreading, and people can't even agree on basic facts like how many people died from it.
Right.
Like that shouldn't be, and it's very frustrating for me.
Yeah, and sometimes these changes take generations to happen, right?
How did it screw up so quickly then?
Yeah. Well, I guess,
or is that just a naive person? It seems to me like it's gotten a lot, but maybe that's just because increased news and everything has exposed us to more of it. But it really does feel like it's gotten a lot worse really quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's to your point, like the media, the technology, anybody can stand on a soapbox now, and we can easily find people who share, commonalities, whether good or bad, and live in an echo chamber. But I think it's kind of like we don't know how to handle the technology, and that's where it leads us to. But then I think the future generations will learn from that. It's kind of, I think, I know I'm getting philosophical here, but you look at it from a macro perspective, it's probably beyond our time, and it'll get there. But unfortunately, it's kind of painful.
Not sure whether I hope you're right or not, because that's kind of like things will get better, but it's going to take a long time. So I'm like, I don't know whether I hope you're right or not, but that's better than things are going to get worse.
Yeah. I mean, well, think about it. Like slavery was ended, right? And then the civil rights movement and so forth. But look how long between slavery ending and then civil rights change. And then there's still some institutional racism, but I think overall people are more aware and more conscious of what's happening in the world and trying to move in the right direction, but you still have the laggards and still problems.
I do think if you zoom out a little bit, like the world is more tolerance of differences, in almost all respects than it's ever been before. Obviously, the exceptions can be horrible and notable, but I think if you look at what it was like to be different 30 years ago or 70 years ago, or we're clearly on a positive trend. Maybe this is just a little bump in the road.
Yeah, but a regression, right? I think there's ebbs and flows in human civilization, but we're moving in the right direction. I hope.
Yeah. And it makes sense that for some people who feel like we're moving too fast, they would be like, whoa, wait a minute. I think you definitely saw that with same-sex marriage. You saw where there was like a whole bunch of progress, and it looked like there were no obstacles, and then all of a sudden there was just like a huge group of people who were like, whoa, we're moving too fast on this. And I think that's kind of eased off as they found new things to complain about. And so I think on that broader spectrum, the fact that we've moved on from that is a positive sign that now we're on other issues, and then maybe we'll move on from those and we'll be on something else. And the set of issues that we've resolved will get bigger, favorably will get bigger and bigger.
For sure. David, well, we have to have another podcast soon, and we'll talk about a lot more.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, man. I certainly appreciate it. And maybe we'll set up something next month as new updates come out.
My pleasure.